The Japanese city of Yokohama was one of the first ports to open trade with the West in the mid-19th century, bringing Japan out of its relative isolation and allowing for the import of goods, culture, and of course, sporting events. Although the Japanese had horses and horse-involved sports, it wasn't until British residents of the port city started hosting their own events that Japan was exposed to horse racing in the modern way we think of it today. The spectator sport became a hit and was even a favorite spectacle of the emperor himself. Within a decade or so thereafter, formal Japanese jockey clubs were created. It's why the Japan of today is one of, if not the biggest horse racing countries in the world, spurred on by what some argue is a cultural preference towards sports that involve pageantry and ceremony. It's also why a ton of Japanese developers that have been around for a long time seem to invariably have a horse racing game somewhere in their catalog, even the developers of Pokemon. Pocket Card Jockey Ride On is a re-release of a cult 3DS exclusive from Gamefreak that's landed on the Apple Arcade of all places. Despite that not being my gaming platform of choice, I couldn't help myself. This game's got too weird of a premise to not at least try out. And I'm glad that I did, not just to satisfy my curiosity for a gaming oddity, but also because it's actually kind of fun. Because if nothing else, it's a solitaire game, which is kind of hard to get wrong. It's specifically a variant known as golf, where you try to wipe out 7 columns of cards by placing incrementing or decrementing numbers on the board, suits be damned. But what makes it a little bit more complicated than that is the meta systems at play here. The cards are not just this video game abstraction that you do while horse stuff happens in the background, they're sort of codified into the game's really self-aware story. You play as a jockey who, upon his first attempt to race with a horse, gets kicked in the head and dies. In heaven, he meets an angel who will return him to life for the sole purpose of winning horse races, and gives him the magical power of being able to control horses by playing solitaire. Weird as it sounds, it's told with funny writing, and it's a bummer that after that intro, the writing takes a back seat almost entirely, relegated to introductions of or scoldings by the number of different horse owners that you jockey for. Your goal is to win trophies, lots of trophies, more trophies than any one horse could ever earn in a lifetime, which is why the game splits up your indefinite jockey campaign into the finite 2-year career of high-tier racing horses. Start with the horse of whatever owner will trust you, win some big events, earn trophies, and you'll get other owners flocking to you and have the opportunity to ride their horses, each with different stats, preferences, and passive abilities. The way the races themselves work is kind of involved. I've played a couple of novelty solitaire games in my day, but I don't think I've played any that have the audacity to have Pocket Card Jockey's multi-phase complexity. Your race opening gate departure is in itself a little microhand that you play, the speed of which determines how strong you'll start. In between serving up cutscenes of you and your horse rounding the field, you'll alternate between 2 interlocking systems. There's a map screen where you direct your horse, and then there's the solitaire hands you play. The overlap comes in the form of your horse's statistics. Positioning might give you an advantage or get you ahead of the pack at the cost of playing a more difficult solitaire hand. Power, mood, energy, and stamina are all different attributes that need to be juggled and can increase or decrease depending on how efficiently you play your hands. But beyond efficiency, there's also speed, and that might be one of Pocket Card Jockey's most contentious variables, the fact that your solitaire hands are timed. Maybe I'm just suffering from years of conditioning that position solitaire as a stress-free, all-ages casual activity, but it being fast-paced and requiring undivided attention across multiple hands puts it kind of at odds with how I normally like this kind of game, and maybe even at odds with the pick-up-and-play platform that it's on. Which isn't to say that the time limits are unreasonable. As long as you're monitoring your horse's needs and responding accordingly, then the majority of hands are easily clearable in the time allotted. It's just that this pressure looming in the distance made the game feel not like solitaire, despite the fact that that's literally what it is. The average race will be anywhere from 2 to 5 hands, with more hands correlating to longer distances. After all hands are played, you get to the final straightaway of the race, which shifts the game into another gameplay style, real-time movement. You can move your horse up and down to avoid congestion and also use a finite amount of whips to prod them forward. But this final step is largely just a test to see how well you've managed your horse's stamina to this point. Does it all come together seamlessly? I don't know if I'd go that far. I think it took me the entire career of my first horse to get the hang of what was going on here. This game expects way more of you than any other solitaire game and most other mobile games, which makes sense considering its 3DS origins. Where I think I got the most enjoyment beyond the solitaire itself was the horse breeding meta layer, because the big long-term hook in Card Jockey is what happens at the end of a horse's career, the fact that they can spend their twilight years being a stud on the farm. The horse breeding system is also draped in a card theming. Crafting the ideal Punnett square is visualized by the fact that horse pedigrees are represented with playing cards. Ideal mates are not only the horses that have the most similar running styles, but also make the best Texas Hold'em hands, as the breeding process will generate 3 random cards from a deck of 52, in addition to each of the cards that represents the parent. A strong poker hand is the equivalent of strong genetics for your foal, who can then begin racing and eventually retire to go on and produce children of its own once you line it up with another horse with opposite parts. Building up a collection of high card value retired horses so they can go generate some more is an excellent incentive to keep playing more and more races. It's super intuitive and endlessly replayable. If you're willing to overlook its platform of choice and the fact that its timed solitaire isn't the low pressure activity you may have expected, then Pocket Card Jockey Ride On will reward you. It takes the inherent infiniteness of solitaire and wraps it in a smart long-term progression jockey career system and an intuitive short-term progression horse career system, all the while dressing it up with a fun aesthetic and unique theme. It takes some time to learn exactly how it works, plus the story runs out of gas after about 15 minutes, not even pretending to be anything more than just a thin premise. But the core to this package is way more than just a funny headline. It's a solid game and a worthwhile cultural export.